It is rainy outside today. Welcome to my podcast, Young, Wired, and Unmedicated. I'm Lauren Vigero. I have ADHD, and we're going to talk about it. In this episode, I wanted to talk more so about decision paralysis and what is kind of behind all of that. I find myself every single day in a decision paralysis, and it genuinely is not my fault for the most part. It's just the way that my brain works. So let's break it down and let's go through some of the things that are a little bit more technical, and then we can go ahead and work on problem solving for them. I got a whole list today. Whole list, baby. Okay, first I want to talk a little bit about the science of the ADHD brain. So really the issue that causes the whole ADHD part is the prefrontal cortex, right? It is the forehead of your brain, okay? It don't work right, okay? And some of the receptors don't work as they should, right? The prefrontal cortex is responsible for thinking, thought, analysis, and regulating behavior. This includes mediating conflicting thoughts, making choices between right and wrong, and predicting the probable outcomes of actions or events. This vital region of the brain regulates short-term and long-term decision-making. In addition, it helps focus thoughts, enabling people to pay more attention and learn and concentrate on goals. And we don't have that. I mean, we do, but like it grows a little less. It grows at a slower rate for us. It matures slowly, which sucks for us because now we have all these issues with behavioral decision-making, thoughts, all of it. We have issues. But specifically, the decision-making process is what I want to talk about. My battery's dying, so I'm going to switch it. A lot is happening in our brain all the time, and especially thought. Right? If we hear a certain trigger word, we'll start going down this whole rabbit hole of something that has nothing to do with the conversation that we've had. Right? That same process, that same thing can go for decision making. Right? You can think about one thing, but then you can lead to all these other different thoughts that are all different other decisions. And then when you're thinking about all those other different decisions, you're getting overwhelmed because now you have too many decisions. It's kind of like when you go to the grocery store and you want to buy tomato soup. You look at all of the brands of tomato soup or even toothpaste. You go and pick something out at the grocery store and there's 17 different kinds of tomato soups, right? And you're trying to figure out what kind you want, right? Does it have low sodium? Does it have less sugar added? Does it, you're trying to figure out how all of this is you're gonna get that one can of soup out of all these 17 different options. And it's very overwhelming, right? You used to see this whole wall of cans of tomato soup and you got to pick one of them. It gets very overwhelming. It goes the same thing for people with ADHD. Even the simplest task of, hey, what do you want for dinner tonight? There's just way too many options, way too many possibilities, way too many add-ins and takeouts of, different food choices that we can select. So it gets very overwhelming for us to make a decision because we're thinking about all the different options basically in the world or that we know of. And we're thinking about all these things that we want to eat or we could eat, the possible options. It's not even that we want it, but we just think about all the options because we don't have that stopping receptor up there to stop the thoughts and just think about what's kind of in front of us. It's executive dysfunction, right? So that's kind of what they particularly call it. So it's difficulty in planning, organizing, and executing tasks. And for an example, I also got caught up in this as well. One of my exes got mad at me because I couldn't plan dates. Like I never planned a date, like a date night or whatever. And it was just like impossible for me because there's so many things you could do. There's so many things you can buy them and you don't know if they're gonna like it. You don't know, what time they're going to be available. Like, you don't know much of anything, really. And then you go into all these different possibilities in your head, and then you go to the store and you try to pick out cards and flowers and food, and then you're just overwhelmed by, again, the food and, what kind of flowers, I know she likes this one, but they don't have that, so what other colors. Like, there's so much that goes into planning a date and making sure that it's right, and it's so overwhelming. And things that kind of go in it is the fear of making mistakes, right? You don't want to upset them because then it'll cause a whole other wave of issues. You don't want it to be bad, because if it's bad, then they probably won't want to go on another date with you, right? Or they could get mad at you for, not doing it right or whatever, Also, the fact of the inattention, right? The part where you just lose focus, and it doesn't happen on purpose. We just lose focus. Like, we'll be, going out, we'll be getting flowers, okay, but then we get distracted because we go to the baking section and we're looking at all this frosting and the sugar and the cookies and the, this, that, and the other, and then we get distracted, and then we end up leaving not with what we wanted or came for. We end up leaving with something completely different because our brains just lost focus, just completely ignored the fact, and then we just forget, and then we just leave, and that is that, right? Then we get working memory overload, right? So we also struggle to hold and process multiple pieces of info simultaneously. So that's like back to my date thing, is like when you have multiple pieces of the date, like what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to drive to a location. Okay, well, what location? There's like 15 different locations around town. There's parks, there's gazebos, there's go-kart tracks, there's all kinds of things. And then it's like, how much do you want to spend? Okay, well, I got a budget of like, I don't know, $150, right? And, then it's the food, right? Well, where are we going to eat the food? If we're going to go to go-karts, we're going to eat before or after? So there's like so many moving parts, and we can't really process that many moving parts simultaneously, because then we just get lost. And again, our focus goes to somewhere else, something more simpler, and it's probably most likely our phones. We go on TikTok or Instagram, we just kind of lose track of time, and then the time runs out, and then you're stuck with nothing because you've spent all this time stressing and worrying about all the different moving parts, and then you got tired of that, so you just stopped and made your brain feel good for a second. It just, all of this ends up in a big wad of overwhelm, and then you're overwhelmed. That equals to stress, and stress equals indecision. So having a lot of things going on in your brain is really troubling, and it's hard, and it's stressy, and it makes you really not want to focus on that at all, even though the attention is there, it's, you want to do something nice, right? It's just, the problem is that we just cannot do it, because when we try to, we just get stuck, we overthink, we stress out, and then we wasted time. And, the impacts of this, again, is the stress and anxiety, right? Low self-esteem after this, like, oh, I'm such a bad partner, I can't, do the simplest of things, is just plan a simple date, and then it ends up in frustration, and then you get angry, and then the anger is never good because nobody likes the anger. And so, and then you also have to deal with the backlash of whatever your inaction did to anybody else, right? Could be a group project, could be anything like that, a work meeting, I don't know, something like that. You have to deal with the backlash as well as yourself beating yourself up for what you didn't do. So it gets very difficult when you have all this indecision and you have all these things going on in your brain that are very hard to sort out and separate. I've definitely had a lot of scenarios in my life where the indecision has been very, very overwhelming. I remember when I was in California and I really didn't like the job or where I was living. And I really battled with myself moving. And, I couldn't go back to my parents because A, they don't want me there. And B, it's also like degrading, going back to your parents' houses after you're, trying to make it out in the world by yourself, right? And so I would just go back with this indecision and like trying to figure out all different parts of the puzzle of where to move, how much money is it going to cost, what am I going to do for a job, all these different things, how much savings do I have? So big decisions like that is really, really hard because there's so many moving pieces that it just becomes so clouded in your brain. Same thing kind of when I had to pick out a college, right? I had so many things writing on, like trying to get a scholarship for basketball, but I also wanted to go to film school because, that's what I wanted to do. Like I already knew that I wanted to do film for my job. And, it was hard because, I didn't want to pay out-of-state tuition because, I don't want to afford that. And, you got to pay for the books. And then also, so there's just like a lot of different moving pieces. And, it's like, well, what school in North Carolina can I go to that is, relatively easy to get into, but also, has what I want to do, which not a lot did have a lot of those programs. But, again, so the decision part was very not the best. Granted, if I knew then what I know now, I probably would have made a better college decision. But honestly, it doesn't really matter anyways because COVID happened during my time. So none of it probably would have mattered anyways, which is a good feeling to think about because, even if I felt like I went to the wrong college, I still think, it wouldn't matter because COVID happened and nothing really mattered when COVID hit. I've had a lot of things, especially in like relationships. Relationships have been very hard for me for deciding, when to call it, when to let go of the idea of them, when to, just a lot of moving parts. The decision process and the thinking constantly and the never being able to put an idea to rest. It's always kind of going in the back burner or in the front, again, it depends on what kind of, trigger hits. It's usually always a trigger. Know your triggers, I suppose, is another thing that I strongly suggest is knowing your triggers. Going back to the decision process, what I've always found is there's a lot of moving pieces, so write all of those pieces down on a piece of paper. It's great because you can visually see what all of the moving pieces are. Once you have all the moving pieces down on paper, again, it doesn't have to be in a line, it could be all over, scattered all over the paper, right? Once you have all the moving pieces out on paper, then you can go ahead and start to kind of organize it and kind of planning out accordingly. So getting a journal, getting a notebook, getting a, even a loose leaf piece of paper, writing out things is so much easier because it's easier to visually see it rather than it all being up here in your brain. That's what I've kind of found out is that like I'm visually kind of seeing it up here bouncing around in different things. But if I just take that and I put it out on paper, it stays there. So I don't have to rethink about it, so that I can organize it in the way that I need to. Or I can branch off of it, but the idea still is there and I don't forget about it. Because, the prefrontal cortex in us doesn't really like to remember and retain things. By getting it out on paper, it's a lot more helpful, a lot more useful. And you can always come back to it and have that whole thought process thought out on a piece of paper, which is really nice. Lists, like I mentioned this in like every one of my podcasts, but like list is something that you really need to do, right? So especially, if you're going grocery shopping for the date, you have a list of things to get. That way you're not thinking about, oh, well, I need to get this, I need to do that. You have it all out there. It's budgeted. Now you just need to figure out what kind of can of soup you want. Because you still got to decide what brand. But it becomes a little more easier for you to break down things and just pick something out and move on to the next thing. So lists, phenomenal for the brain. Time management helps with the decision paralysis. So time management techniques like calendars, planners, lists, like I said, timers, things like this can help you if you need to do something for like work or for school, whatever. It helps you plan out things prior to it needing to be done. So if you go ahead and do it beforehand, before, the added stress of time becomes heavy, you can go ahead and get ahead of that. And then you're all set, you're laid out, okay, I got this to do, let's go ahead and do this, get it done out the way. And how you do that is prioritizing, right? What is the most important thing to get done? Ask yourself that, because, if you're doing a lot of things that you can do 2-3 days later, then do them then. Like, you don't need to be doing that when you have something else that's more important needing to be done. Yes, procrastination is a thing, but when you have a specific deadline, you're more likely to do that one if you know your deadline and you prioritize that thing. So what's the most important thing in this thing? Let's get it done, right, for decision making. Another strategy is weighing pros and cons. So I did this a lot. I did this for college. I did this for different jobs. If I got like 2 job offers or whatever, I've done this for relationships. I really have. I've written out pros and cons of each thing. And again, I take those pros and cons and I look at them and I circle them, I highlight them, I star them, I mark up the whole paper, and it looks like a playlist for like a basketball game or something. I don't know. But it helps us see the benefits, right? But it also lets us see the things that could be not as fun. So deciding that way between the two can help. And if you want to go even further than that, then you can do like a decision matrix where it's basically evaluating options based on specific criterias and then assigning weights to them and score them that way, right? So like a point system, kind of. Based on each criteria that you have. Like, okay, this job has this thing, right? I can move up in the company, but this job over here seems more fun. However, it doesn't really have much to move up in, So it's kind of like that. And you're just doing it with points. I don't like numbers, so I don't do that. But like I just do the pros and cons and like give it a tick if it's like the most important thing based on what I gave it, right? Another thing that helps with decision paralysis is relaxing, right? So when you come into a really intense decision, like, oh my God, like, should I work at the summer camp this summer or should I just, go travel, right? That's a big thing to decide, and it's going to stress you out because your brain is automatically going to start ticking with different outcomes, different ways of doing it. You're going to try to do them at the same time, and you're going to try to like figure it out all in your brain. It's going to start going like white on rice, right? So what I do is I always just take a step back, right, and be calm for a second, right? I listen to music, I watch a video, I take a break, and then I come back to it and I revisit it, and then I go ahead and I list out my pros and cons, right? I say, okay, well, this offers me this offers me that, which one should I go for? Pros and cons. But having those stress reductions help you be more calm in making the decision. Because when you have a lot of stuff on your plate and it becomes very overwhelming, you start to get very frustrated. And when you get frustrated, you get angry. So it's very important for you to be calm before you start getting into the thick of it and possibly getting frustrated because you can't make a decision. And then it limits that anger, and that's good for everybody around you. Okay. So reducing stress and doing techniques that calm you, right? Could be like a perfume, or, it could be like an eye mask or something to just give you a second to be like, okay, I have this decision coming up. I need to, think about it. I need to list out all these options. Let's just take a second and calm down, and then let's reevaluate it. And that might need to happen like a few times because, granted on the depths of the decision that you're deciding between, right? You could need a lot of breaks and time to just calm down. So again, setting deadlines is something that really helps with this, and implementing routines. So, structuring those breaks to reduce the stress. Doing the same mundane things so that your brain has more time to think about the decision making that's going on, right? Because it makes it easier for you to think about these things when you're not thinking about 17 different other things like, oh my God, I haven't brushed my teeth yet, or oh my God, I should have made coffee, right? When you already have these routines set in stone. So that way, when you're doing them, you can just think about, what you need to think about, and that your brain is kind of clear for that kind of decision making. So it's less enticed to get distracted. And you can also do these things with like mind maps are also a good strategy. It's kind of just get all of your thoughts out, just mind map it, right? So you think about one thing, draw a line to it, think about the other thing, and just literally just spewing out everything that you're thinking about. And oh my gosh, let me tell you, I've done those kind of exercises, and the whole page fills up, and you're like, oh, so this is what my brain looks like on the inside. So it's pretty cool to see, but also it does help the thought process, and eventually will help the decision process. And then also, some kinds of apps also help you as well. I use like Notion for, planning things or budgeting. It definitely helps a little bit. But most of the stuff I just do on notebooks or paper. That definitely helps more than, apps, because obviously I get distracted on my phone, and, one thing leads to the other, and then you're just swallowed by social media yet again. But decision paralysis happens a lot, and it sucks. It really does. And, I hopefully gave you some tools to add to your toolbox to kind of work around it. There really is no way around it. You kind of just have to go through it. But these are some things that kind of help you comb through the process, okay? And again, decisions are every single day, whether that be what do you want for dinner or what should I wear for today? It could be the smallest things like that, not even just what am I going to do for jobs or, school, college, whatever the case may be. All of these processes help. I go through this every single day, sometimes more, depending on what I got going on that day. So it's really important to stop, think about it, de-stress, process it, and then go ahead, weigh things out, and make your decision. Now, sometimes you don't got time to be, doing all this stuff, right? Sometimes you have to make a decision right then and there. And my job currently is teaching me a lot about decision making in the moment, right? And what I've learned with decision making in the moment is when you have a really intense, quick thing to decide about, like this weekend I was working a really big event, and I had to figure out the Wi-Fi situation because I can't really do anything, stream, or, connect the laptops together if I don't have Wi-Fi. And so that was a big issue when I was setting up, and I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do about this Wi-Fi, right? My router doesn't work. The Ethernet cable doesn't exist. There's no import for that. And what am I going to do? And so when you're thinking off the cuff like this, there becomes a lot of things, again, going on in your brain. And then you start going through the whole, solution process where, okay, what can I do right now? I can finish setting up my stuff and worry about the Wi-Fi, and come back to it. And then while I'm setting up the stuff, because I already know it's already in my routine, I can think about how to solve this Wi-Fi solution, right? And then I ended up, asking the venue for a Wi-Fi passcode. It was pretty bad, but, it sufficed for the weekend. It did its job. Another thing is that sometimes the announcers mess up the numbers, or they start saying something and you think they're going to start the dance, but it's not there. Sometimes you have to know when to start and stop it, right? Sometimes you get fooled, so then you have to quickly write a false start, or the dancer messed up or ran off stage, whatever the case may be. You have to think really quickly. And sometimes, you're the only one that can make that call, right? You're the only one that can start and stop it. You're the only one that could type the issue in. You're the only one that is controlling this. And so you kind of have to use your best judgment. And in those situations, it's very stress-inducing, but also sometimes you have to make a decision so quick that you don't even have time to think about it. You just do it. And I was realizing that I was doing that. Sometimes when you have no time, you just make a decision and you stick with that decision, and you deal with the consequences of it. But there's no weighing out, there's no this, that, and the other. Sometimes you have to make a decision like that, and you gotta deal with it. And sometimes that's the best decision making you could probably do, because it's so clean. There's no thought behind it. You just do it. You just do it based off of your training and what you've been taught, right? So if you have enough of these instances where you're doing all these pros and cons, and you're doing this whole decision-making strategies and this, that, and the other, I feel as though that if you do it enough, it will train your brain so that later on, when you have to make these rash decisions, it will be the correct ones, because you've been training your brain to think and process like this. So by making these really hard decisions, you're doing yourself a service, because in the future, your brain will just take over on autopilot and you won't have time to think about anything, and it'll just make a decision for you. And sometimes it's nice. Sometimes that's what it's supposed to do. So at the end of all this, I just want to say that sometimes it does get easier with decision making, but sometimes you also have to put in the work. And people with ADHD, I feel like we have to put in a little bit more work, because we get so overwhelmed and we have issues handling our emotions, right? So we have to do a little bit more to prepare, and we have to do a little bit more to kind of get to the bottom of what we actually want and what we're going to decide to do. So I want to tell you, be kind to yourself, and, go easy on yourself. But then also, once you've said that enough to yourself, you know what to do. So just do it at the end of the day, right? So it will get a little bit easier, but also as life goes on, the decisions get harder. And so they try to play with you. But, if you're starting out using these techniques and stuff, later on when those bigger decisions hit, you're more equipped to deal with them. So decision paralysis sucks. And a lot of people do have them. But ADHD people deal with it every single day over the most smallest decisions. And it's common. Way more common than you think. But it basically comes from a state of being overwhelmed. So you have to get yourself in a state that's not overwhelmed to then make a clear decision, right? And we've talked about how to do that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, give it a like, give it a comment. Comment a little sunshine, right? A little ray of sunshine, right? These are all the tips that give you a little bit of sunshine when you're, dealing with the dark, gloomy, overwhelming decisions, okay? But stay positive. It will work itself out. It always does. That's just how life is. It always works out in one way or another. And if it doesn't, then you learn from it. Life is basically a game, right? Have fun with it. I know it doesn't feel like fun. It won't feel like fun, but you have to make your own fun. You have to make it fun for you, because that's how you kind of get through this life and have a good time doing it, I will see you guys next Sunday for another episode of this podcast. Peace out. Enjoy life. Live it up.